They thought my silence meant submission. They thought the woman who never raised her voice at family dinners was someone they could control. But as I sat there in that sterile conference room, watching my husband's business partner slide a document across the mahogany table, a document that would strip me of everything I had built, I realized something profound. The quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards. And I was about to show my hand. My name is Isabella Hartman, and if you had asked anyone in our social circles 6 months ago who I was, they would have told you I was Marcus Hartman's wife, the supportive spouse, the woman who smiled prettily at charity galas while her husband closed million-dollar deals. They saw the pearls, the designer dresses, the house in the suburbs with the circular driveway. What they did not see was the woman who had built the fortune that paid for all of it. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in our Brookstone estate, a house I had purchased through a private trust 2 years earlier. My reflection showed a 37-year-old woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple twist, wearing a navy blue sheath dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but whispered elegance rather than screaming wealth. That was always my philosophy. Let your bank account do the talking, not your outfit. It was a Thursday evening in late September, and Marcus had just informed me we were having dinner with his business partner, Julian Crane, and Julian's wife, Vanessa. The location was Luminescence, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. What Marcus did not know, what he had never bothered to discover despite 7 years of marriage, was that I owned Luminescence. Not through some obvious LLC with my name on it, but through a carefully constructed network of holding companies that all led back to one person, me. I had started my first tech company at 24, fresh out of Stanford, with a computer science degree and a head full of ideas that investors initially dismissed because I was young and female and did not fit their picture of what a founder should look like. But I had something they did not. I had code that worked. I had a product that solved a real problem. And when Bright Horizon Analytics sold 3 years later for $62 million, I had something else. I had capital. Marcus, I called down the stairs, smoothing my dress one final time. Are we taking the Audi or the Range Rover? His voice drifted up from the first floor, tight with an anxiety he was trying to mask. Let's take the Range Rover. Julian expects a certain image. Of course he did. Julian Crane was a man who measured success by the size of your car and the prominence of the logo on your watch. He had come into Marcus's life 2 years ago with a proposal for a commercial real estate venture that promised astronomical returns. What Julian brought to the table was charm and connections. What Marcus brought was the capital. My capital, funneled through accounts that Marcus believed represented his share of investments he thought he had made on his own. I walked down the curved staircase, my heels clicking softly on the Italian marble I had selected from a quarry outside Florence. Marcus was waiting in the foyer, checking his reflection in the antique mirror I had bought at an estate sale in Connecticut. He looked handsome in his charcoal suit, his sandy hair styled perfectly, his jaw strong. He looked like a man who belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. He also looked nervous. "You look beautiful," he said, but his eyes were distant, already somewhere else. We drove in silence for the first 10 minutes. The late September air was crisp, and the city lights were just beginning to flicker on as we merged onto the highway. I watched Marcus's hands on the steering wheel. They were gripping it too tightly, his knuckles showing white against his tan skin. "Is everything all right?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He glanced at me, then back at the road. "Everything is fine. Julian just wants to discuss the quarterly numbers. You know how he gets." I did know how Julian got. I knew because I had spent the last 3 months quietly investigating the commercial real estate venture that was supposedly making Marcus such a successful entrepreneur. What I had discovered was that the venture was hemorrhaging money. Properties were sitting vacant. Loans were in default. and Julian Crane was frantically trying to cover the losses by bringing in new investors to pay off the old ones. It was a pyramid scheme, dressed up in expensive suits and leather portfolios. "The reservation is for 7, Marcus said as we pulled up to the valet stand at Luminescence. The building was a stunning structure of glass and steel, designed by an architect I had personally commissioned. Every detail, from the lighting to the music to the temperature, had been calibrated to create an atmosphere of refined luxury. A young man in a crisp uniform opened my door. "Good evening, ma'am. Welcome to Luminescence." I stepped out, my eyes scanning the entrance. I could see Thomas, the general manager, standing just inside the glass doors. He caught my gaze and gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement. We had a protocol. When I dined here as a guest, he treated me exactly like any other patron. No special treatment, no knowing glances. It was important that Marcus never suspected. "Mr. Hartman," Thomas said as we approached, his voice warm and professional. "Your party is already seated. Right this way." We followed him through the main dining room. The space was full but not crowded, the low hum of conversation mixing with soft piano music from the corner where our house musician played a Steinway grand. The scent of truffle oil and fresh bread hung in the air. I had approved the menu 3 months ago, and I knew the food cost percentages on every dish. The private dining room was on the 2nd level, accessible by a floating staircase that seemed to defy gravity. The room itself was enclosed in floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. Julian and Vanessa were already seated at the round table, glasses of champagne in front of them. "Marcus," Julian said, standing with his arms spread wide, like they were old friends reuniting after years apart, though they had seen each other 2 days ago. "And the lovely Isabella. You look radiant as always." Julian Crane was 52, but worked hard to look 40. He had the kind of tan that came from too much time on yachts and golf courses, and his teeth were so white they practically glowed in the candlelight. His handshake was firm, calculated to convey confidence and dominance. Vanessa, his wife, was a different story. She was 29, a former model who had married Julian 18 months ago, in a ceremony that had been featured in a lifestyle magazine. She wore a dress that cost more than some cars and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Please, sit," Julian said, gesturing to the empty chairs. "I have taken the liberty of ordering champagne. We are celebrating tonight." I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. "Celebrating what?" Julian's smile widened. "Marcus has not told you? We have just secured our biggest investor yet. This is going to change everything for Hartman Crane Ventures." I looked at Marcus. He was staring at his champagne glass, watching the bubbles rise. "That is wonderful news," I said, my voice warm and encouraging. "Who is the investor?" "A gentleman named Victor Ashford," Julian said, leaning back in his chair with the posture of a man who had just won a hand of poker. "He is bringing in $5 million. With that kind of capital, we can finally move forward on the downtown development project." $5 million. I knew exactly who Victor Ashford was. He was a retired hedge fund manager with a reputation for aggressive litigation and questionable ethics. He was also the kind of man who would demand his money back with interest at the first sign of trouble. "That is quite a commitment," I said. "He must have a lot of faith in the project." "He has faith in us," Julian corrected, raising his glass. "To Hartman Crane Ventures. To the future." We clinked glasses. The champagne was excellent, a vintage I had personally selected for the wine list. It tasted like success and secrets. The waiter appeared, a young woman named Claire, who I knew was working her way through graduate school. She presented the menus with practiced elegance. I did not need to look at mine. I knew every item, every ingredient, every preparation method. "I think we should start with the oysters," Julian announced. "And let's get a bottle of that Bordeaux. The 2015. Marcus, you will love it. It is bold, complex, everything a real wine should be. Marcus nodded, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He was worried about the cost. Marcus nodded, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He was worried about the cost. He had no idea that every dollar he spent here was essentially moving money from one of my pockets to another. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The oysters arrived on a bed of crushed ice, arranged like small treasures. Julian dominated the conversation, talking about market trends and zoning regulations and architectural renderings. He spoke with the confidence of a man who believed his own lies. Vanessa said very little, occasionally nodding or laughing at the appropriate moments. She had perfected the art of being decorative. Marcus was unusually quiet. He picked at his oysters, barely touching the wine. I could feel something building, a pressure in the air, like the moments before a thunderstorm. "Isabella," Vanessa said suddenly, turning her attention to me. "I've been meaning to ask, what do you do with your time? I mean, now that Marcus is so busy with the business, do you volunteer? Join clubs?" It was a question designed to diminish me, to reduce my existence to hobbies and pastimes. I smiled at her. "I stay quite busy," I said. "I do some consulting work. Technology sector mostly." "How nice," Vanessa said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. I tried working once. Modeling, obviously, but I found it so exhausting. I much prefer supporting Julian in his endeavors. A strong man needs a supportive wife, do you not think? "I absolutely agree," I said. "Support is everything in a marriage." Julian laughed, a booming sound that carried across the room. "That is why I chose Vanessa. She understands her role, unlike some women who think they need to compete with their husbands." The comment hung in the air like smoke. I felt Marcus shift uncomfortably beside me. The main courses arrived. I had ordered the sea bass, prepared with a lemon caper sauce that our chef had spent weeks perfecting. Julian had the ribeye, cooked rare, blood pooling on the white plate. Marcus had ordered the same, though he was barely eating. "Julian," Marcus said finally, setting down his fork, "there is something we need to discuss. About the downtown project." Julian's expression did not change, but I saw his eyes sharpen. "Now is not the time, Marcus. We are celebrating." "I think Isabella should know," Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength. "She is my wife. She deserves to understand what is happening." Julian's smile became fixed, frozen. "Of course, though I am not sure this is the appropriate venue for business discussions." Marcus turned to me. His face was pale, and I could see a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Isabella, there have been some complications with the venture. Some of the properties are not performing as expected. Julian thinks we need to bring in additional capital to cover the shortfall." "How much additional capital?" I asked. Julian waved his hand dismissively. "It is a temporary liquidity issue, nothing to concern yourself with. These things happen in commercial real estate. The market fluctuates." "How much?" I repeated, looking at Marcus. $2 million, Marcus said quietly. "Julian thinks I should contribute another $2 million to keep the project viable." I sat back in my chair, processing this information that I already knew. I had known about the failing properties for months. What I had not known was that Julian was going to pressure Marcus tonight, in public, with witnesses. "That is a significant amount," I said carefully. "It is an investment in our future," Julian said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Marcus, you know as well as I do that we are on the verge of something massive here, but we need to weather this temporary storm. Partners support each other. That's how business works." "I need to think about it," Marcus said. "I need to review the numbers." "What numbers?" Julian's voice was sharp now, cutting. "We've been over the numbers 100 times. Either you're committed to this partnership or you're not." Vanessa placed her hand on Julian's arm. Darling, perhaps we should give them some time to discuss it privately. No, Julian said, shaking off her hand. This needs to be resolved tonight. Victor Ashford expects to see commitment from both partners. If Marcus backs out now, it makes us both look weak. I am not backing out, Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. I just need time to secure the funds. You have access to funds, Julian said, leaning forward. You have assets. The house alone must be worth $3 million. Take out a line of credit. This is not complicated. And there it was, the trap. Julian was not just asking for an investment. He was asking Marcus to leverage everything we owned, to put our home at risk for a failing venture that would never recover. I looked at Marcus. I looked at the man I had married 7 years ago, the man I had supported and funded and built up. I waited for him to defend me, to tell Julian that he would not risk his family's security without consulting his wife. Instead, Marcus said, I will talk to the bank on Monday. Something inside me shifted. It was not dramatic. It was not a crack or a break. It was more like a lock clicking into place. I had spent 7 years being supportive, being quiet, being the wife who stood behind her husband. And in that moment, I realized that Marcus would throw me under the bus to save his pride. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip. The Bordeaux was perfect, rich and complex with notes of dark fruit and oak. Julian smiled, victory evident in his eyes. Excellent. I knew you would see reason. To partnerships. He raised his glass. Marcus raised his hand trembling slightly. Vanessa raised hers, looking bored. I did not raise mine. Isabella? Julian said, noticing my stillness. Are you not going to toast to your husband's success? I set my glass down gently. I have a question first, Julian. About the downtown development project. How many units are currently leased? The question caught him off guard. His smile faltered for just a second. That is proprietary information, Isabella. I do not think. I am asking because my husband is about to risk our home, I said, my voice calm but firm. I think I deserve to know the occupancy rate of the properties we are investing in. The occupancy rate is fine, Julian said dismissively. These things take time. The market. 12%, I said. The occupancy rate is 12%, which means 88% of the units are sitting empty. And according to the mortgage documents I reviewed, the properties are already in default on 3 separate loans. The table went silent. Marcus was staring at me with his mouth slightly open. Vanessa had stopped pretending to be interested and was now watching with genuine attention. Julian's face had gone very still. How did you? Marcus started, then stopped. How did I know? I asked. Because I did what you should have done before you signed the partnership agreement. I investigated. I pulled the county records. I reviewed the loan documents. I spoke to an attorney about what happens when commercial properties default. Julian's expression had shifted from charming to dangerous. You have been snooping into our business affairs? They are my husband's business affairs, I said, which makes them my concern. Isabella, Marcus said, his voice tight. Can we discuss this at home? No, I said. I think we should discuss it right here, right now. Because Julian is asking you to invest $2 million into a project that is failing. And when it collapses, and it will collapse, we will lose everything. Our home, our savings, everything. You do not understand business, Julian said, his voice dripping with condescension. This is a long-term play. Short-term losses are expected. I understand business perfectly well, I replied. I sold a company for $62 million when you were still trying to convince banks to give you your first commercial loan. I understand leverage and liquidity and what happens when you try to cover a pyramid scheme by bringing in new investors. The words were out. The accusation was made. Julian's face turned red. How dare you, he hissed. How dare you sit at this table and accuse me of running a pyramid scheme? I have built a legitimate business. You have built a house of cards, I said, and you want my husband to be holding the cards when it falls. Marcus grabbed my arm. His fingers dug into my skin. Isabella, stop. You're embarrassing me. I turned to look at him. Really? I'm the one embarrassing you? Julian stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This dinner is over. Marcus, if you cannot control your wife, then perhaps we need to reconsider our partnership entirely. That was the moment. That was the exact moment when I stopped being Marcus Hartman's supportive wife and became something else entirely. I stood up slowly, deliberately. I smoothed my dress and looked Julian Crane directly in the eyes. You are absolutely right, I said. This dinner is over, and so is your charade. I walked toward the door of the private dining room. Before I opened it, I turned back. By the way, Julian, I said, my voice carrying across the room, the occupancy rate I mentioned, I did not get that from public records. I got it from my property management company. The same company that manages this restaurant? The same company that owns the building you are standing in. I watched his face change as the realization hit him. My name is not just on the deed to the house Marcus wants to mortgage, I continued. It is on the deed to 6 restaurants, 4 commercial buildings, and a portfolio of residential properties worth $40 million. Everything Marcus thinks he built, I built it. Every investment he thinks he made, I funded it. And this restaurant where you just tried to humiliate me, I own it. I opened the door. Thomas was standing just outside, as I knew he would be. Thomas, I said, please prepare the bill for Mr. Crane's table, and make sure it includes the full bottle service fee for the champagne and the Bordeaux. No discounts. Yes, Mrs. Hartman, Thomas said, using my married name, but with a tone that made it clear he knew exactly who I was. I walked out of that private dining room. I walked down the floating staircase. I walked through my restaurant, past the diners who had no idea they had just witnessed the beginning of an earthquake. I walked out into the September night, and I did not look back. Behind me, I could hear Marcus calling my name. I could hear Julian's voice raised in anger. I could hear the clatter of silverware and the murmur of shocked conversation, but I kept walking. I pulled out my phone and called a car service. While I waited, I sent a text message to my attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen, who had helped me structure my holdings years ago. The text was simple. Need to meet first thing tomorrow. Preparing to file for divorce. We'll also need a forensic accountant to trace all funds invested in Hartman Crane Ventures. Suspect fraud and misappropriation. The car arrived 3 minutes later. As I slid into the back seat, I felt my phone buzz. It was Marcus. The text said, "What the hell did you just do? Come back inside. We need to talk." I did not respond. Instead, I called my sister, Sophia. She answered on the second ring. "Izzy, what is wrong? You sound weird." "I need you to come to my house tomorrow," I said. "Bring a camera and a witness. I am going to need documentation of everything in the house before Marcus realizes what is happening." "Wait, what?" Sophia said. "What is going on?" "I just ended my marriage," I said, "and possibly sent a man to prison for fraud. Can you help me?" There was a pause. Then Sophia said, "I will be there at 8 in the morning. Do you need a place to stay tonight?" "No," I said, looking out at the city lights streaming past the window. "I am going home. It is my house. He can leave." That night, I slept in the guest room. Not because I was afraid of Marcus, but because I wanted space to think. He did not come home until after 2 in the morning. I heard him stumbling through the house, slamming doors, muttering to himself. At one point, he stood outside the guest room door, and I heard him try the handle. I had locked it. He knocked. Softly at first, then harder. "Isabella," he said, "we need to talk about this. You cannot just blow up my life like this." I did not answer. "I know you are in there," he said, his voice getting louder. "This is my house too. You cannot lock me out. Actually, I thought but did not say. I can. Because it is my house. The deed is in my name, held through a trust you never bothered to investigate. Eventually, he gave up. I heard him walk away, heard his footsteps heavy on the stairs, heard him go into our bedroom, our former bedroom. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, running through everything I would need to do. File for divorce, separate all financial accounts, change passwords, secure documentation, protect my assets. And then there was Julian Crane. I knew enough about his operation now to know he had committed fraud. He had lied to investors about property values and occupancy rates. He had created false financial statements. And if I was right, he had been siphoning money out of the venture into personal accounts. I could destroy him. The question was whether I wanted to. The answer came quickly, yes. Not because I was vindictive, but because men like Julian Crane hurt people. They ruined lives. They took money from investors who trusted them and left wreckage behind. If I did nothing, he would find another Marcus to manipulate, another family to destroy. The next morning, Sophia arrived at exactly 8 a.m. with her husband David, who was a notary. They brought cameras and a legal pad and 3 extra-large coffees. Sophia hugged me tightly. "Are you okay?" "I am better than okay," I said. "I am clear." We spent 4 hours documenting everything in the house, every piece of furniture, every painting, every appliance. We opened safes and photographed jewelry. We went through files and made copies of documents. David notarized statements about the condition of the property. Marcus emerged around noon, looking haggard and angry. He stopped short when he saw Sophia and David. "What is this?" he demanded. "This is documentation," I said calmly, "for the divorce proceedings." "You cannot be serious," he said. "Isabella, we have been married for 7 years. You cannot just end it because of one argument." "It was not one argument, Marcus. It was 7 years of me building everything while you took credit. It was you being willing to risk our home without even consulting me. It was you telling me to stop when I tried to protect us from a con artist." "Julian is not a con artist," Marcus shouted. "He is a businessman." "He is a criminal," I said. "And I have already contacted the SEC. They will be opening an investigation into Hartman Crane Ventures by Monday." Marcus went pale. "You did what?" "I reported securities fraud," I said, "which is my legal obligation once I became aware of it." "You are destroying me," he whispered. "No," I said. "You destroyed yourself. I am just refusing to go down with the ship." B. Marcus looked around the room at Sophia and David, at the cameras and the paperwork. He seemed to realize for the first time that this was real, that I was serious, that his life as he knew it was over. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked. "That is not my problem," I said. "But you need to leave this house, today." "This is my home," he said, his voice breaking. "No," I said gently but firmly. "It is not. It never was. The deed is in my name. The mortgage is in my name. You have been living in my house, driving my cars, spending my money, and calling it yours. But it was always mine." I watched him process this information. I watched the realization spread across his face like a stain. "I want you out by 6 p.m. tonight," I said. "Take your personal belongings. Everything else stays." "You cannot do this," he said. But there was no conviction in his voice. He knew I could. Marcus left at 4 p.m. with 3 suitcases and a box of personal items. He did not say goodbye. He did not apologize. He just loaded his things into his car, the car I had purchased 2 years ago, and drove away. I stood at the window and watched him go. I felt nothing. No sadness, no relief, just a vast, empty calm. Sophia came and stood beside me. "Are you sure about this?" "I have never been more sure of anything," I said. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved quickly. My attorney filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Marcus's attorney tried to claim he was entitled to half of everything. My attorney responded with documentation showing that every asset was held in my name alone, acquired before or during the marriage with my separate property funds. The SEC opened their investigation into Julian Crane. Within days, they had frozen his accounts and issued subpoenas for all financial records related to Hartman Crane Ventures. The local news picked up the story. Businessman under investigation for securities fraud. Julian's face was on the evening news, looking haggard and cornered. Marcus called me once, 2 weeks after he moved out. "Isabella," he said. His voice sounded hollow. "Julian is threatening to sue me. He says this is all your fault, that you sabotaged the business." "Did you steal investor money, Marcus?" I asked. "No, of course not. That was all Julian. You just what?" "I just did not ask questions," he admitted. "I wanted to believe it was real. I wanted to be successful." "You were successful," I said. "You just did not realize it was my success, not yours." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I'm sorry." "It's worth very little," I said. "But I appreciate you saying it." We hung up. It was the last time we spoke directly. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Marcus got nothing except his personal belongings and his car, which technically I could have reclaimed, but chose not to. He moved to another city, got a job at a mid-level marketing firm, and disappeared from my life entirely. Julian Crane was indicted on 14 counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. He went to trial 8 months later. I testified as a witness for the prosecution, explaining how I had uncovered the fraud and why I had reported it. Julian glared at me from the defense table the entire time I was on the stand. He was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Vanessa divorced him before the sentencing. She married a plastic surgeon 6 months later. As for me, I sold Luminescence, not because I had to, but because I wanted a fresh start. I sold it to the chef for a price well below market value, with a clause that required him to keep the staff for at least 2 years. I started a new venture, a technology incubator for women entrepreneurs. I funded it entirely myself and kept complete control. No silent partners, no con artists, no husbands who wanted credit for my work. The first company we funded was run by a 26-year-old woman who had developed an algorithm for detecting financial fraud in real time. I thought that was fitting. I never remarried. I dated occasionally, but I was careful. I had learned my lesson about trusting too easily, about supporting too generously, about staying silent too long. Sometimes, late at night, I would think about that dinner at Luminescence. I would remember the look on Julian's face when I revealed I owned the restaurant. I would remember Marcus calling my name as I walked out. And I would smile, because in that moment I had stopped being someone's wife and become myself again. I had stopped whispering and started speaking. And the sound of my voice, calm and clear and absolutely certain, had brought down an empire built on lies. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. But the story did not end there, because 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a phone call that would change everything again. It was a Tuesday morning in early spring. I was sitting in my office at the Technology Incubator, reviewing pitch decks from 3 new applicants, when my assistant buzzed me. "Mrs. Hartman," she said, though I had asked her repeatedly to just call me Isabella. "There is a woman here to see you. She does not have an appointment, but she says it is urgent. Her name is Charlotte Ashford." Charlotte Ashford. The name sounded familiar, but I could not place it immediately. "Send her in," I said. The woman who entered my office was in her early 50s, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored suit that screamed old money. Her hair was silver, cut in a sharp bob, and her eyes were the pale blue of Arctic ice. "Mrs. Hartman," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for seeing me without notice. I am Charlotte Ashford, Victor Ashford's wife." And there it was. Victor Ashford, the investor who had put $5 million into Julian Crane's fraudulent venture. The man who was now suing Marcus for return of his investment, even though Marcus had no money to return. "Please, sit," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Charlotte sat down, placing her Hermes bag carefully on the floor beside her. She looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Calculation mixed with something that might have been respect. "I imagine you are wondering why I am here," she said. The thought crossed my mind, I admitted. Charlotte smiled. It was a thin, sharp smile. "I want to thank you." I blinked. That was not what I had expected. "Thank me? For exposing Julian Crane?" she said. "My husband lost $5 million in that venture." "Yes. But he was prepared to invest an additional $20 million. If you had not come forward when you did, we would have lost everything." "I did not do it for you," I said carefully. "I did it because it was right." "I know," Charlotte said. "That is why I am here. Mrs. Hartman, may I be frank with you? Please." "My husband is an idiot," Charlotte said. The bluntness of the statement was startling. "He made his money through a combination of luck and inherited wealth. He has no business sense whatsoever. He invests based on gut feeling and handshakes, and the lies of charming men like Julian Crane. I have spent 30 years watching him make terrible decisions." "I see," I said, not sure where this was going. "2 months ago," Charlotte continued, "I went to see an attorney. I asked about divorce, about separating my assets from my husband's before he loses everything we have. And the attorney told me that in our state, assets acquired during a marriage are typically considered marital property, regardless of whose name is on the account. That is generally true," I confirmed. "Unless," Charlotte said, leaning forward, "those assets are held in a structure that predates the marriage or are clearly segregated as separate property with proper documentation and intent." I was beginning to understand. "You want to protect your assets. I want to learn how you protected yours," Charlotte said. "Mrs. Hartman, I have done my research on you. I know about Bright Horizon Analytics. I know about your holdings. I know that you managed to walk away from your marriage with everything intact, while your ex-husband got nothing. I want you to teach me how to do the same." I sat back in my chair, studying her. "What makes you think I would help you?" she said. "Because you believe in protecting women from the consequences of their husband's stupidity," Charlotte said. I said, "What exactly are you asking for?" Charlotte said. "I want you to refer me to your attorneys," Charlotte said. "I want to understand how to structure my assets so that when Victor inevitably destroys himself financially, I am not destroyed with him. I'm willing to pay whatever consulting fee you think is appropriate." "Charlotte." I considered this. Charlotte Ashford was not a friend. She was not even someone I particularly liked from our brief interaction. But she was a woman trying to protect herself from a man's bad decisions. And I understood that intimately. "I will do better than a referral," I said. "I will have my attorney meet with you directly and walk you through the entire process. Pro bono." Charlotte's eyes widened slightly. "Why would you do that?" "Because 10 years ago, I wish someone had done it for me," I said. "I had to figure it all out on my own. You do not have to." Charlotte stood up and extended her hand again. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartman." "Isabella," I corrected. "Call me Isabella." She shook my hand firmly. Her grip was strong. "Thank you, Isabella." After Charlotte left, I sat in my office, thinking about protection and power and the ways women have to safeguard themselves in a world that still assumes their wealth belongs to the men in their lives. I called Patricia Chen, my attorney. "Patricia," I said when she answered, "I need you to do something for me." "Of course," she said. "What do you need?" "I need you to create a seminar," I said, a workshop for women on asset protection, how to structure holdings, how to maintain separate property, how to protect yourself financially in a marriage. I want it to be free, and I want it to be comprehensive. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is a brilliant idea. When do you want to do this?" "As soon as possible," I said. "And Patricia, I want you to reach out to other attorneys who specialize in this. I want a whole network. I want women across the country to have access to this information." "Consider it done," Patricia said. That seminar became the foundation for something bigger. We called it the Fortress Project. It was a nonprofit organization dedicated to teaching women how to protect their financial interests. We held workshops in 12 cities. We created online resources. We offered free consultations with attorneys and financial planners. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of women attended. They came from all walks of life. Some were wealthy, like Charlotte Ashford, trying to protect inheritances and businesses. Some were middle-class women who just wanted to make sure they would not be destroyed if their marriages fell apart. Some were young women who had not even married yet, but wanted to be prepared. Every one of them had a story. Every one of them had watched a woman, their mother or sister or friend, lose everything in a divorce or because of a husband's bad investment. They were tired of being vulnerable. They wanted tools. We gave them tools. One of the women who attended was named Grace Martinez. She was 42, a nurse, married to a man who had spent the last 15 years making increasingly risky business decisions. She came to one of our workshops in Phoenix. After the session, she approached me. "Mrs. Hartman," she said. "Isabella," I corrected automatically. "Isabella," she said again, her voice shaking. "I just want to say thank you. I have been feeling so helpless for so long. My husband opened a restaurant last year without telling me. He used our savings as collateral. The restaurant is failing, and we are about to lose our house. I did not know I could do anything about it." "You can," I told her. "It is not too late." Grace worked with one of our attorneys. They helped her understand her options. She ended up filing for separation of assets, a legal maneuver that protected her income and her portion of the remaining savings. Her husband's restaurant sailed 6 months later, but Grace did not lose everything. She kept her home. She kept her security. She sent me a card afterwards. It just said, "You saved my life." I kept that card in my desk drawer. On hard days, when I questioned whether any of this mattered, I would take it out and read it. Meanwhile, the fallout from Julian Crane's conviction continued. Several of his investors filed civil suits. Marcus was named as a defendant in 3 of them, even though he had been as much a victim as an accomplice. He could not afford an attorney, so he represented himself. He lost all 3 cases. He declared bankruptcy. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances. Part of me felt a twinge of pity, a very small part. The rest of me remembered him gripping my arm at dinner, telling me I was embarrassing him, willing to mortgage our home without consulting me. I did not reach out. 2 years after the divorce, I was invited to speak at a conference for women in technology, the keynote address. I almost said no. Public speaking had never been my strength. I preferred the background, the strategy, the quiet work of building systems and structures. But then I thought about all the years I had stayed quiet, all the times I had let Marcus take credit, let Julian dominate the conversation, let people assume I was just the supportive wife. I accepted the invitation. The conference was in Seattle, held in a massive convention center with over 2,000 attendees. I stood backstage, wearing a charcoal gray suit and a simple gold necklace, listening to the moderator introduce me. Our keynote speaker today built and sold her first company for $62 million before the age of 30. She is the founder of the Fortress Project, a nonprofit dedicated to financial literacy and asset protection for women. She is a venture capitalist, an entrepreneur, and a fierce advocate for women in business. Please welcome Isabella Hartman. The applause was thunderous. I walked out onto the stage, into the lights, in front of thousands of women who had paid to be there, who wanted to hear what I had to say. I stood at the podium and looked out at them. For 7 years, I began, my voice steady and clear. I was invisible. I built companies and I managed investments and I created wealth, but I did it quietly. I let someone else take the credit because I thought that was what a good wife did. I thought supporting my husband's ego was more important than claiming my own achievements. The room was silent, everyone listening. And then one night, I continued. I sat at a dinner table and watched my husband agree to risk everything we had without even asking my opinion. I watched his business partner try to humiliate me. I watched them assume I was just a decoration, just a name on a marriage certificate. I paused, remembering that night at Luminescence, the weight of the silverware in my hands, the taste of the Bordeaux, the moment I decided to stop being invisible. And I realized something, I said. My silence was not protecting anyone. It was not keeping the peace. It was just making me complicit in my own erasure. I told them the story. Not all of it, but enough. I told them about discovering the fraud. I told them about walking out of the restaurant. I told them about taking back my life. When I finished, the applause lasted for 3 minutes. Women were standing. Some were crying. A woman in the front row mouthed the words, "Thank you." After the speech, there was a meet and greet. A line of women waited to talk to me, to shake my hand, to share their stories. One woman told me about leaving an abusive marriage with nothing but a suitcase. Another told me about discovering her husband had a second family in another state. Another told me about fighting for custody of her children while her ex-husband used their shared business to control her. Every story was different. Every story was the same. They had all been told, in one way or another, that their voices did not matter, that their contributions were not valuable, that they should be grateful for whatever scraps of recognition they received. And they were done being quiet. 3 years after the divorce, I was having lunch with Sophia at a small bistro near my office. We were talking about her daughter, my niece Emma, who was starting college in the fall. "She wants to study business," Sophia said. "She keeps talking about your incubator. I think you are her hero." "That is terrifying," I said. But I was smiling. Sophia laughed. "You are good at this, Izzy, at helping people, at building things that matter. Are you happy?" It was a simple question, but it made me pause. Was I happy? I thought about my life. I thought about the incubator, the women we had funded, the businesses they were building. I thought about the Fortress Project, the workshops, the women like Grace Martinez who had been saved from financial ruin. I thought about the speeches I was giving, the conversations I was having, the systems I was changing. "Yes," I said, "I am happy." And I was. Not in the way I had been happy in my marriage, that shallow contentment that came from not making waves. This was something deeper. This was the satisfaction of knowing my life mattered, that my work had impact, that my voice was being heard. That night, I was going through some old files, preparing to donate them to an archive of women business leaders, when I found a letter I had written to myself 10 years earlier. It was dated 2 weeks before I met Marcus. I had just sold Bright Horizon Analytics. I had just become wealthy beyond my wildest expectations. And I had written myself a letter about who I wanted to be. The letter said, "I want to build things that last. I want to create opportunities for other people. I want to use my success to lift others up. I want to be brave and honest and true to myself. I want my life to mean something." I read it twice, then I set it down on my desk and realized something profound. For 7 years, I had abandoned that vision. I had made myself smaller to fit into Marcus's life. I had hidden my success to protect his ego. I had betrayed the woman who wrote that letter. But I was not betraying her anymore. I picked up my phone and called Patricia Chen. "Patricia," I said, "I want to start something new." "Tell me," she said. "I want to create a fund," I said. "A venture capital fund exclusively for women-led startups. I want to put $50 million into it, and I want to structure it so that the founders retain control." No boards full of men telling them what to do. No investors demanding they hire a male CEO to be taken seriously. Just capital and support and trust. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is ambitious." "I know," I said, "but I can do it. I have the resources. I have the network. I just need the structure." After Patricia said, "I will have a proposal for you by next week." The fund launched 6 months later. We called it Hartman Ventures. I was the sole general partner. We funded 12 companies in the first year. 12 women who had brilliant ideas and no access to capital because investors did not think they looked like founders. One of those companies was run by a woman named Alicia Thompson. She had developed a software platform for managing childcare logistics. Every investor she had pitched had told her the market was too small, that parents would not pay for that kind of service. I knew they were wrong. I had seen the research. I knew how much working parents struggled with childcare coordination. I wrote her a check for $2 million. 18 months later, her company was valued at $50 million. 3 years later, it was acquired by a major tech company for $200 million. Alicia called me the day the acquisition closed. "Isabella," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I do not even know what to say. You believed in me when no one else would." "That is what we do," I said. "We believe in each other." But the success stories were not the only reason I kept going. There were failures too. Companies that did not make it. Founders who struggled. Markets that shifted. But even in failure, there was value. Because the women I funded learned. They grew. They built networks and skills and confidence. And when they tried again, they were better prepared. And they knew they had a community behind them. They knew they were not alone. 5 years after the divorce, I ran into Marcus by accident. I was in Chicago for a conference, walking through the lobby of my hotel, when I heard someone call my name. "Isabella?" I turned around. He looked older, tired. His hair was graying at the temples. He had gained weight. He was wearing a suit that was off the rack, not bespoke. "Marcus," I said, "how are you?" "I am okay," he said. "Working in advertising now. Regional account manager." "It's fine. Good. Stable." He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes, not quite regret, but close to it. "I heard about your fund," he said. "Hartman Ventures. I saw an article in Forbes. It called you one of the most influential women in technology." "It has been a good few years," I said. "I am happy for you," he said, and I thought he might actually mean it. "You deserve it. You always deserved more credit than I gave you." It was not an apology, not really, but it was an acknowledgement, and that was more than I had expected. "Thank you," I said. We stood there for an awkward moment. Then Marcus said, "I should let you go. I'm sure you are busy." "Take care of yourself, Marcus," I said. "You too, Isabella." I watched him walk away, back into whatever life he had built after everything fell apart. I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Just a vast neutrality. He was a stranger now. A person I used to know in a life that no longer belonged to me. I went upstairs to my hotel room. I had a speech to prepare for the next day. Another conference, another 1,000 women waiting to hear about building businesses and protecting assets and claiming their power. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop. As I started typing notes for my speech, I thought about the woman I had been 5 years ago. The woman who sat at a dinner table and stayed silent while men discussed her future without her. That woman was gone. She had walked out of a restaurant into the night, and she had never looked back. This woman, the one typing in a hotel room in Chicago, preparing to stand in front of thousands of people. This woman was someone different, someone stronger, someone unafraid. Someone who had learned that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards. And I had just begun to play my hand. The speech the next day was titled The Cost of Silence. I talked about what we lose when we do not speak up. I talked about the price women pay for being accommodating, for being supportive, for letting others take credit for our work. I talked about what it takes to find your voice, not just to speak, but to speak with authority, to speak with certainty, to speak with the knowledge that you have earned the right to be heard. After the speech, a young woman approached me. She could not have been more than 25. She was crying. "I am sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. Your story. It is my life right now. My boyfriend. He started a company using my code. He is taking meetings with investors and acting like he built everything. And I have been letting him because I thought that is what you do when you love someone. You support them. I looked at her. I saw myself at 25, brilliant and talented and so certain that making myself smaller would make someone else love me more. "What is your name?" I asked. "Jenna," she said. "Jenna," I said. "Do you have any documentation? Proof that you wrote the code?" "Yes," she said. "I have all my commits in GitHub. I have emails. I have everything." "Good," I said. "Then here is what you're going to do. You are going to talk to an attorney. Not his attorney, your attorney. You are going to establish your intellectual property rights. And you are going to stop supporting his lie. But I love him," she whispered. "I know," I said gently. "But love should not cost you everything you have built. If he loves you, he will respect your contributions. If he does not, then you need to protect yourself." I gave her Patricia Chen's contact information. I told her to mention my name. 3 months later, I got an email from Jenna. She had retained an attorney. She had established that she was the rightful owner of the intellectual property. Her boyfriend had tried to fight it, but the evidence was overwhelming. They broke up. She started her own company. 6 months later, she raised her first round of funding. Her email ended with, "Thank you for teaching me that my voice matters." I saved that email too. As the years passed, the Fortress Project grew. We expanded to 20 cities. We created online courses. We trained other attorneys to run workshops. We built a network of thousands of women who were protecting their assets, claiming their power, refusing to be erased. Hartman Ventures funded 60 companies in 5 years. 42 of them survived past the critical 3-year mark. 18 of them were acquired or went public. The portfolio was worth over $1 billion. But the number that mattered most to me was different. It was the number of women who told me I had changed their lives. The number of women who had found their voices. The number of women who had stopped being silent. I counted them all. Every card, every email, every handshake after a speech. Every Jenna, every Grace, every Charlotte. They were my real return on investment. On the 7th anniversary of the day I walked out of Luminescence, I went back to the restaurant. I had sold it years earlier, but I called the current owner and arranged a private visit. I walked through the empty dining room in the middle of the afternoon. The space looked the same glass walls, the same floating staircase, the same view of the city skyline. I stood in the spot where I had stood that night. I could almost hear Julian's voice, see Marcus's face, feel the weight of Eleanor's words. And then I walked to the entrance. I stood at the threshold, exactly where I had stood 7 years ago before I stepped out into the night. I remembered the fear I had felt then. Not fear of Marcus or Julian or what they might do. Fear of the unknown. Fear of being alone. Fear of what would happen when I stopped being someone's wife and became just myself. I looked back at the restaurant one last time. Then I walked out the door. And this time, I was smiling. Because I knew now what I had not known then. The unknown was not something to fear. It was something to claim. It was a blank page, a clean slate, a story waiting to be written in my own handwriting. I had spent 7 years being a supporting character in someone else's narrative. and then I had decided to write my own. The story was not over. It would never be over, not as long as I had breath and purpose and work to do. But this chapter was complete. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel, and tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. Pricktagtingsten. I walked out of Luminescence for the second time, but this time I was not leaving a marriage or a betrayal. I was leaving a memorial, a reminder of who I used to be and who I had chosen to become. Pricktagtingsten. The September evening air was cool. The city lights were beginning to flicker on. Pricktagtingsten. Strong, I pulled out my phone and called my assistant. Strong, I pulled out my phone and called my assistant. I'm taking the night off. Strong, I pulled out my phone and called my assistant. Everything is perfect, I said. I drove home. Not to the house I had shared with Marcus. I had sold that years ago. Home was now a loft in the city, a space I had designed myself, filled with things I had chosen, a reflection of the life I had built on my own terms. I poured myself a glass of wine, the same Bordeaux from that dinner, 7 years ago. I sat by the window and looked out at the city. And I thought about all the women out there, sitting at dinner tables, listening to men make plans for their futures without consulting them. Women who were building companies in secret, hiding their brilliance, making themselves smaller. I thought about Jenna and Grace and Charlotte and the thousands of others. And I hoped they would remember what I had learned, that silence is not safety, that accommodation is not love, that protecting someone else's ego is not your job, that your voice matters, that your work matters, that you matter. I raised my glass to the city, to all the women who were still finding their courage, to all the women who had already found it. And I drank to the truth. The quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards. But sooner or later, you have to put them on the table. And when you do, when you finally show your hand, when you finally speak your truth with clarity and certainty and power, the whole world has to listen. Because your voice, once you decide to use it, can change everything. It changed my life, and it can change yours too. All you have to do is speak. 10 years after I walked out of Luminescence, I received an invitation that surprised me. It was embossed on heavy cream cardstock, the kind that whispered old money and established institutions. The Women's Leadership Foundation was honoring me with their Legacy Award for my work with the Fortress Project and Hartman Ventures. The ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday evening in May at the Grand Ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel. Black tie, 500 guests. A seated dinner followed by speeches and the award presentation. I almost declined. Awards had never been my motivation. But then I read the rest of the invitation. The keynote speaker was listed as Charlotte Ashford. Charlotte, the woman who had walked into my office 10 years ago, asking me to teach her how to protect her assets from her husband's terrible investments. I had not spoken to her in years, though I had followed her career from a distance. After her divorce from Victor, she had taken control of her family's investment portfolio and grown it by 400%. She had become one of the most respected investors in the country. I accepted the invitation. The night of the ceremony, I stood in front of my closet trying to decide what to wear. My assistant, Maya, had helped me narrow it down to 2 options: a red gown that made a statement, or a simple black dress that let my work speak for itself. I chose the black dress. It was elegant, understated, and expensive in a way that did not announce itself. I paired it with diamond earrings, my only extravagance, and simple heels. Maya had arranged for a car to pick me up at 6. As I rode through the city toward the Fairmont, I found myself thinking about the last formal event I had attended. It had been Marcus's 40th birthday party, just months before the divorce. He had rented out an entire restaurant and invited 200 people to celebrate. He had given a speech thanking everyone for their support, for believing in him, for being part of his journey. He had not mentioned me once, not even as an aside. I had stood in the back of the room, holding a glass of champagne I was not drinking, and realized I was completely invisible in my own marriage. That night had been one of the final straws, one of the many moments that had accumulated into the critical mass necessary for me to finally walk away. The car pulled up to the Fairmont. A red carpet stretched from the curb to the entrance, lined with photographers and reporters. I had not expected media attention, but apparently the event was newsworthy enough to warrant coverage. As I stepped out of the car, flashbulbs went off. Someone called my name. "Miss Hartman, over here. Can you tell us about the new initiatives at the Fortress Project?" "Ms. Hartman, is it true you are planning to expand Hartman Ventures internationally?" I smiled politely and kept walking. Maya had coached me on this. Be gracious, but do not stop. Save your words for inside. The grand ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with classical frescoes. Round tables covered in white linen filled the space, each set for 8 with elaborate floral centerpieces. At the front of the room was a raised stage with a podium and a screen for presentations. I was seated at table 1, directly in front of the stage. To my right was Patricia Chen, my attorney and now the executive director of the Fortress Project. To my left was an empty chair with a place card that read, Charlotte Ashford. Patricia hugged me when I sat down. "You look beautiful," she said, and terrified. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, "just not used to being the center of attention." "We'll get used to it," Patricia said with a smile. "You have changed a lot of lives, Isabella. People want to honor that." The other guests at our table introduced themselves. There was a senator who had championed legislation to improve financial literacy education in schools. There was a CEO of a major tech company who had implemented mandatory asset protection workshops for all employees going through divorce. There was a judge who specialized in family law and had used our materials to help women navigate complex financial settlements. They all had stories about how the Fortress Project had impacted their work, their lives, their communities. As I listened to them, I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. This was real. The work I had started out of my own pain and anger had grown into something that mattered to thousands of people. Charlotte arrived just as the appetizers were being served. She looked radiant in a silver gown, her hair still that striking silver bob, her posture confident and commanding. "Isabella," she said, leaning down to hug me. "It has been too long." "It has," I agreed. "I am looking forward to your speech." Charlotte smiled. "It is going to make you cry. Fair warning." The dinner proceeded with the usual formal event rhythm. Salad, then a fish course, then the main entree. Conversation at our table was lively, intelligent, and focused on the work we all cared about. Nobody asked me about my personal life, or whether I was dating, or why I had never remarried. They asked me about funding strategies and legal structures and how to scale impact. It was refreshing. After dessert, the lights dimmed and the program began. The Foundation's director gave a brief welcome speech, then introduced Charlotte. Charlotte walked to the podium with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years in boardrooms, commanding respect. She adjusted the microphone and looked out at the crowd. 10 years ago, she began, I was trapped. Not physically, not violently, but financially. I was married to a man who was systematically destroying our family's wealth through bad investments and worse judgment, and I felt completely powerless to stop it. The room was silent. 500 people listening to Charlotte's story. I went to see an attorney, she continued. I asked about divorce, about protecting myself. And the attorney told me it would be difficult, complicated, expensive, that I would probably lose half of everything, even though I had done nothing wrong. I left that office feeling hopeless. Charlotte paused, her eyes scanning the room until they found mine. And then a friend told me about a woman named Isabella Hartman, a woman who had built a fortune, protected it through a divorce, and was now teaching other women how to do the same. I made an appointment. I walked into her office expecting to pay thousands of dollars for advice. Instead, she gave me something much more valuable. She gave me her time, her expertise, and her belief that I deserved to be protected. I felt my throat tighten. Isabella connected me with her attorney, Charlotte said. She walked me through every step of the process. She showed me how to structure my assets, how to document everything, how to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with my husband. And when I tried to pay her, she refused. She said the only payment she wanted was for me to help the next woman who needed it. Charlotte's voice was steady, but I could see emotion in her eyes. That was the beginning of the Fortress Project, she said. That philosophy of women helping women, of knowledge shared freely, of protection as a right, not a privilege. In the 10 years since that conversation, the Fortress Project has helped over 50,000 women protect their financial interests. 50,000 women who might otherwise have lost everything. The room erupted in applause. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. But the impact goes beyond the numbers, Charlotte continued, because every woman who protects herself sends a message to her daughters, her sisters, her friends. The message is this: you do not have to be a victim. You do not have to accept financial abuse or manipulation or control. You have options. You have power. You have rights. More applause. Patricia reached over and squeezed my hand. Isabella Hartman could have walked away from her divorce and lived a quiet, comfortable life. Charlotte said she had the money, she had the freedom, but instead she chose to build something that would outlast her. She chose to create systems and structures that would protect women for generations to come. That is not just success. That is legacy. Charlotte looked directly at me. Isabella, would you please come to the stage? I stood up, my legs shaking slightly. Patricia gave me an encouraging nod. I walked to the stage, the applause growing louder as I climbed the steps. Charlotte handed me a crystal trophy, heavy and beautiful, engraved with my name and the words, "Visionary Leader, Champion for Women." We hugged. She whispered in my ear, "Thank you for saving my life." I stepped to the podium. The applause continued for what felt like an eternity. Finally, it quieted, and 500 faces looked at me expectantly. I have never been comfortable with attention, I began. For most of my life, I preferred to work in the background, to let others take credit, to stay quiet and safe and invisible. I paused, gathering my thoughts. That changed one night 10 years ago when I sat at a dinner table and realized that my silence was not protecting me, it was erasing me. I was disappearing into someone else's story, and if I did not speak up, I would cease to exist entirely. I looked out at the crowd. I saw women of all ages, all backgrounds, all stories. What I learned that night, I continued, is that our voices are not luxuries. They are necessities. When we stay silent about financial abuse, about being excluded from decisions that affect our lives, about having our contributions dismissed or stolen, we are not keeping the peace. We are enabling our own destruction. I felt the words flowing now, no longer nervous, just honest. The Fortress Project exists because I wish someone had taught me these things before I needed them, I said. I wish someone had told me that love does not require financial vulnerability, that marriage does not mean surrendering control of your assets, that supporting your partner does not mean erasing yourself. I looked at Charlotte, standing to the side of the stage. 10 years ago, Charlotte walked into my office and asked me to teach her what I had learned. And I realized that my painful experience could become someone else's protection, that my mistakes could become lessons, that my voice, which I had suppressed for so long, could help other women find theirs. The room was absolutely silent now. This award is not really for me, I said. It is for every woman who has ever felt powerless in her own life. Every woman who has been told her contributions do not matter. Every woman who has watched her work be credited to someone else. This is for all of you who are done being silent, who are done being invisible, who are ready to claim your power and use your voice. The applause started again. I left the stage and returned to my seat, my heart pounding. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People approached our table to congratulate me, to share their stories, to thank me for the work. I listened to each one, shook each hand, hugged each woman who needed it. As the event was winding down, a woman in her 30s approached me. She looked nervous, clutching a small notebook. "Miss Hartman," she said, "I'm sorry to bother you. I know you've been talking to people all night, but I needed to tell you something." "Please," I said, "I'm listening." 5 years ago," she said, "I was married to a man who controlled everything. Every dollar I spent, every purchase I made, every decision about our finances. He convinced me it was normal, that he was just better with money, that I should trust him." I nodded, recognizing the pattern. "Then I found the Fortress Project online," she continued. "I took one of the workshops, and I learned that what was happening to me was financial abuse, that I had rights, that I could protect myself." "What happened?" I asked gently. "I hired an attorney," she said. "I've documented everything. I discovered he had been hiding assets, lying about income, preparing to divorce me and leave me with nothing. But because I had learned how to protect myself, I was ready. I got a fair settlement. I kept my business. I rebuilt my life." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "I have a daughter," she said. "She is 8 years old. And because of what I learned, I am going to teach her something I never knew. That her financial independence is not negotiable. That she should never give anyone else control over her security. That her voice matters." She reached out and took my hand. "You did not just save me," she said. "You saved my daughter's future." I could not speak. I just squeezed her hand and nodded. "That is why I do this work," I managed to say finally. "For daughters and granddaughters and the women they will become." The woman thanked me again and disappeared back into the crowd. I stood there for a moment, overwhelmed by the weight of what we had built. Patricia came up beside me. "Ready to go home?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "I think I need a minute." I walked out to the balcony overlooking the city. The May air was warm, carrying the scent of spring flowers from the garden below. As city lights spread out before me like a constellation of possibilities, I thought about the woman I had been 20 years ago, young, brilliant, eager to build something meaningful. I thought about the woman I had become during my marriage, smaller, quieter, invisible. And I thought about who I was now, not defined by who I had been married to or what I had lost, but by what I had built and who I had helped. The journey had been painful. Divorce always is, even when it is necessary. But the pain had transformed into something powerful. It had become purpose. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Miss Hartman, this is Jenna. I do not know if you remember me. You helped me 3 years ago when I was struggling with IP theft. I just wanted you to know, my company just closed a Series B funding round. $20 million. I am the CEO. I own 51%. And it is all because you taught me to protect what was mine. Thank you for everything." I smiled and saved the message. These were the moments that mattered. Not the awards or the recognition or the media coverage. These private victories. These women reclaiming their tower. These daughters learning different lessons than their mothers had learned. I heard footsteps behind me. Charlotte joined me on the balcony. "Beautiful night," she said. "It is," I agreed. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking at the city. "Can I tell you something?" Charlotte asked. "Of course," I replied. "When I first came to see you," Charlotte said, "I was so angry. Angry at my husband for being an idiot. Angry at myself for staying so long. Angry at a system that made it so hard for women to protect themselves. I was drowning in rage." "I know the feeling," I said, But you turned that rage into something constructive, Charlotte continued. You built something that helps people. And watching you do that, it taught me something important. Anger is valid, but it is also fuel. The question is what you build with it. What did you build? I asked. Charlotte smiled. After my divorce, I started a foundation that provides legal support for women in financially abusive marriages. We have helped over 2,000 women in the last 8 years. Women who could not afford attorneys. Women who were being manipulated by husbands who used the legal system as a weapon. That is incredible, I said. I learned from the best, Charlotte replied. You showed me that our pain does not have to be wasted, that we can take the worst experiences of our lives and transform them into protection for others. We stood there together, two women who had survived, who had rebuilt, who had chosen to turn their scars into armor for the next generation. You know what the best part is? Charlotte asked. What? We are not alone anymore, she said. There are thousands of us now. Women who have been through hell and decided to build fire breaks so others do not have to burn. She was right. The Fortress Project had grown beyond anything I had imagined. We had chapters in 30 countries now. We had trained over 1,000 attorneys and financial advisors. We had created curricula that were being taught in universities. We had changed laws in 12 states to make financial abuse easier to prosecute and asset protection more accessible. We had built an army. Not of soldiers, but of survivors who refused to let anyone else suffer in silence. I should get going, Charlotte said, but let's have lunch next week. I want to talk to you about a collaboration between our foundations. I would love that, I said. Charlotte hugged me goodbye and left. I stayed on the balcony a little longer, savoring the quiet. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Maya, my assistant. Just saw the photos from tonight. You look amazing. Also, 3 interview requests came in. Forbes, Time, and Bloomberg. Want me to schedule them? I thought about it. 5 years ago, I would have said no. I would have stayed in the background, let the work speak for itself. But I had learned something important. Visibility matters. When women see other women succeeding, protecting themselves, using their voices, it gives them permission to do the same. Yes, I texted back. Schedule them all. I walked back inside. The ballroom was nearly empty now. Staff were clearing tables, breaking down the stage. The evening was ending, but the work was just beginning. I collected my things and headed toward the exit. As I walked through the lobby, I passed a group of younger women, probably in their 20s, still in their formal gowns, sitting in a circle of chairs, talking animatedly. Did you hear her speech? One of them was saying. About how silence is not protection? That hit me so hard. I am starting a company next year, another one said. And I am definitely taking one of those asset protection workshops first. I am not making the same mistakes my mom made. I slowed down, listening without being obvious. My boyfriend keeps asking me to put his name on my startup, the first woman said. He says it's because we are a team. But I don't know. After hearing Isabella speak tonight, I feel like maybe I should keep it in my name only. Trust your gut, another woman said. If he loves you, he will understand you protecting yourself. I felt a surge of pride. These young women, they were starting from a different place than I had. They were asking the right questions before they got hurt, not after. I continued walking, smiling to myself. The car was waiting outside. As I settled into the back seat, I looked at the crystal trophy in my lap. Legacy Award. I traced the engraving with my finger. Legacy was not about awards or recognition. It was about impact that outlasted you. It was about the women I would never meet who would benefit from the systems we had built. It was about the daughters and granddaughters who would grow up knowing they did not have to choose between love and financial security. It was about changing the narrative from silence to voice, from vulnerability to protection, from invisibility to power. The car pulled away from the Fairmont. I looked back at the building, all lit up against the night sky, and thought about everyone inside who had gathered to honor work that had started with my own pain, Suffering is universal, I thought, but so is the choice of what we do with it. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. I got home around midnight. I kicked off my heels, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat by the window looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow, the work would continue. There would be more women to help, more systems to build, more voices to amplify. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply be proud. Proud of how far I had come. Proud of what we had built. Proud of every woman who had found her voice because I had found mine. I raised my glass to the city, to all the silent women who were learning to speak, to all the invisible women who are becoming visible, to all the powerless women who are claiming their power. And I made a promise. I would keep fighting. I would keep building. I would keep speaking, because every woman who finds her voice makes it easier for the next woman to find hers. And together, our voices would become a chorus too loud to ignore, a force powerful enough to change everything.